basically is for us to be speaking to, say, community leaders. We are also speaking to NGOs, head of NGOs. We are speaking to counselors, local counselors, and obviously people like yourself in the health industry, just to basically find out if they identify these problems, what they have in their organizations in basically redressing these imbalances in the economy. And so this is what really brings me to yourself. And so I understand that you have more than 20 years experience as a psychotherapist for child and adolescents within the Kent County Borough, working for NHS. And so we understand that you have quite a lot of experience and knowledge within issues within your community. And so we look at you as a community leader, and therefore your opinion certainly matters most in this research. So thank you for making the time for us. Great.
Welcome.
And so I will begin with the questions which we have actually sent to you in advance. This interview we are hoping will last around about an hour 15 minutes. Feel free if you need to pause. If you want us to pause, we can pause. That is not a problem. And so within an hour, we just basically finding out what your thoughts are on these questions. It's very informal. It's just basically to gather, what people are thinking and where the future is. So thank you very much for making time for us. So my first question to you is that what do you think has been the major causes of deepening inequalities and damages to our environment? And if you have any practical examples, that will be very useful.
I suppose that inequality, from my point of view, has always been a factor in the human system of organization. And I think it's because equality is a abstract principle. It's not a lived reality of most species on this planet. And that really, to me, is because competition is the essence of all forms of life. So from the beginning, there is a limited resource of energy that is needed to keep organisms alive. And so it depends which organism is able to take advantage of their ecological niche to make the most of themselves and reproduce their species for the next generation and so on. And so in a way, one of the biggest problems that we have is competition is built into our DNA. It's what keeps us going. The other thing is that we don't often think is that although there are people that define themselves as vegetarian or vegan, for example, we're all predating on other life forms, just that we've defined some as being acceptable life forms and others as not. So we say, oh, we don't eat fish or we don't eat meat, but actually we predate on organic matter. We kill all organic matter in order to consume it. So consumption is absolutely built into the way we operate, and competition is built into the way we operate. And so if you're looking for equality, you're talking about a principle that is, like I say, an abstract. When it comes to human organization, there's also a need to define, just like in any other group relating tribe or troop or whatever, who's going to be the boss, who's going to be the queen of the hive, who's going to be the queen termite, who's going to be the boss wolf or whatever. And automatically, once you have a boss, a leader, some person in charge, you have a sort of form of inequality. So we need to really redefine inequality, because in a way, the idea of everybody being equal isn't helpful. We need someone to lead us. We need someone to show the way. So maybe what we're talking about is something to do with how a group living species like ourselves can live together, where everybody gains from that process, where there are not huge losers and huge winners. And I think if we have a problem these days, I think it's where there are huge winners and huge losers. And I think that the reason for that at the moment is partly to do with globalization, and it's partly to do with technological advancement. And those two things, amongst others, have led to the production of capital that has absolutely multiplied hugely in the last, say, 200 years. So now you can have extreme wealth, extreme exploitation of resources, and that wealth and those resources can be siphoned off for a few to gain supremely, and many to be left in a chattel situation, having to, as workers, uh, work hard to gain little. So that's globalization and the exploitation of labor through technology have been two major factors that have led to massive inequality in our system, I think.
Right. Yes, it's quite interesting. Obviously, the take that you have, basically your input on this matter, because I think that many a times it's very easy for people to sort of jump on that bandwagon thing of saying, everybody has to be equal, and obviously that has been tried in the former Soviet Union and all that, and we notice that these things don't work. And even obviously, if I'm to go to even my own origin as an Ashanti, they have a saying that obviously the hand is not all, it's not the same size. But I suppose that at this stage, the concern that we've had in this sort of competitive environment and excessive extraction, for example, if we look at last year's summer, there was a lot of fires, global fires everywhere in Italy, in America. Climate is getting very hot. Then also the other aspect that we look at is things like governments, because these inequalities, the problem that you have is that if you have a very clever person and somebody that is not so clever, then the clever person almost could have this sort of perpetual advantage and continue to stretch and widen the gap. And so this is where the purpose of governments are there, to sort of rebalance any sort of economy. And so probably what we are seeing now is that we're seeing governments basically coming in. We are paying them. The society is paying them. But I think that they fall short in the way that they try to address these inequalities. So these inequalities, as the take that you have given to us today is very valuable, because sometimes we don't really look at it from that perspective. And but now you're saying that it's an abstract. It's you know, but the reality is that we want to see states getting involved, regulating the system, because if
Mm,
we go on this tangent where people can do whatever they want to become the queen or the boss, or
mm,
then you get that excessive. It's the
mm,
excessiveness of the gap. It's not the fact that the gap shouldn't be there, but
mm,
it's the excessive nature and also its perpetual dimensions.
mm,
This is where obviously the concern is,
mm,
and this is why they advocate in this for this rights-based economy, which then takes in human needs and also human rights in the way that distribution and production is organized. I think at this stage, I'm probably going to also probably see if you can maybe elaborate a little bit, obviously with my input on this before we move on to question 2. So what are your thoughts on what I've just said?
Well, I think that's absolutely right, what you're saying about governments and whether they're acting on behalf of everybody to reduce that gap in inequality. And I'm glad you agree with me that inequality is not something you can get rid of. It's always going to be there. It's about reducing that gap. The question for me, the really important and interesting question, is why do governments not work in our interests? You know, especially if they're elected, especially if they're democratic. Why do they seem to work in their own interests? Why do individuals work in their own interests rather than in the interests of many? And that's a really important question to me that has formed a lot of my research into my own work. So I work with very traumatized children who've been adopted or who are in the care system. And often what used to puzzle me is that those children would come to a benign environment and where they were cared for and loved to some extent, and they would carry on damaging themselves and that environment, even though they had moved on from the trauma that they were in. And it didn't make sense to me, you know, what that was about. And so I researched it. And I'm going to go back again to look at nature again, because I think we have some really interesting parallels in nature.
Yes.
And I came to a man called Michael Chance. He's deceased now, but he was interested in higher primate behavior, which is very close to human behavior. He was looking at bonobo troops and other higher primates, and he was looking under what conditions they cooperated for the benefit of all and what conditions they didn't. And what he found was really, really interesting for me. So he found that when the troops had a perception of threat to resource acquisition, they organized themselves in very, very punitive hierarchies of domination and submission, domination and appeasement. When there were plenty of resources, they were much more collegiate, they were much more democratic, if you like, in their organization. Not a really an appropriate term for it.
Yes.
So, for example, a adolescent would be chastised, would be beaten when there was resource depletion by the adult male.
Yes.
But when there was plenty of resources, the adult male would actually groom the adolescent.
Okay.
So you get this difference in the way they operated.
Yes.
And from that, I began to understand that when primates and maybe humans are under a perception or a real threat, they organize themselves in hierarchies of domination and
Yes.
appeasement.
Yes.
And I began to look for parallels in the human world. And I looked at, for example, the British Royal Marines, where they break down normal mutuality and recognition in attachment relationships during the special training that they do for extreme battle situations.
Okay.
You know, they mistreat soldiers in order to get them to follow orders.
Yes.
So the relationships are not based on compassion or mutuality. They're
Yes.
based on dominance and submission. Because in a battle situation, you need to have people just following orders.
Yes.
for the sake of the group. Now, if you were to upscale that on a macro level, what I think you're seeing at the moment is kind of like, if you like, subterranean threat systems being activated. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is, real threats to our continuity on a
Mm.
global scale through climate
Yes.
change.
Yes.
And not only climate change, but the global south has had enough. Through technology, they know what's in the global
Mm.
north. Yeah.
Yes.
And they're coming
Yes.
because colonialism is done,
Yeah.
imperialism is done. That's what
Yes.
you're seeing in the Middle East. You're seeing this huge battle, really, not just between one state and its supposed terrorist,
Mm-hmm.
neighbor. You're seeing the white imperialist system
Mm-hmm.
against the rest of the world,
Yes.
because it's enough, no more. Yeah. And I think so. You've got these tectonic shifts taking place, which are
Yes.
destabilizing the global economy. And what
Correct.
what they what they lead to is they lead to selfish behavior on the
Yes.
part of those that dominate. Yeah,
Yes.
they want to keep the status quo, and
Yes.
so you get populism, you get fascism, you get a very me-based capitalist economy. And that's
Yes.
what I think is shifting at the moment because of this destabilization of the global economy because of these issues. And because, especially I think in addition to the technological advances, I think you've got one of them is obviously the mobile phone. And as
Mm-hmm.
soon as people see all over the world how the other half lives, that creates a
Mm.
massive, massive issue. So,
Yes.
so that's how I see it at the moment. That governments, a lot of them are feeling in a threat state, as
Mm-hmm.
their populations are,
Mm-hmm.
and it's leading to um, this dominance appeasement strategy rather than more
Democratic.
democratic equalities based strategy.
Okay. Okay. That is quite interesting. I suppose even within the World Trade Organization, there has been issues, obviously, with the position of China. I think at some stage they were classified as a developing nation, and therefore I think they were allowed certain opportunities, and that really upset the United States. In obviously China doing some massive extraction within a lot of countries in Africa.
Mm,
And so, yes, it goes on. What the analysis that you have given definitely is in line with what is really going on.
mm,
Um, I suppose also if you look into Africa in general,
mm,
once again you will probably see some aspect of that pattern
mm,
where leaders come into power with a promise to help. But then once they get in, because obviously Africa has always been under colonial rule and
mm,
obviously have probably been in a more subordinate position
mm,
and probably some scarcity, even though they have so much resources, but domestically they have scarce resources.
mm.
You once again see that leaders come in and they don't necessarily work in the best interest of the nation.
Absolutely, absolutely. And actually, although China is an example of an exploiter, it's
Mhm.
also being exploited or has been exploited for the last 30, 40 years for cheap labor.
Yes.
So when and in a way, if you think about Thatcher and the decline of industries in this country, it's an
Mhm.
inevitability of capitalism that it's going to exploit the cheapest form of labor it can find.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so it's kind of gone to China, and China's been that place. And average wages are going up in China, but they're still nowhere near what they are here. And now
Mhm.
China is doing the same in Africa. And so the capitalist system itself is at its essence, it's exploitative.
Mhm.
So capitalists don't care whether people die. They don't
Mhm.
care about units because there's always a surplus in capitalism. There's
Yeah.
always someone else to or something else to exploit, or they think.
Yes.
And so at the heart of it is actually a heartless system.
System. Okay.
Yeah. And I think that goes into this idea of what Michael Chance called agonic mode thinking or agonic mode behavior.
Right.
Hedonic mode behavior is more of that reciprocity, that
Mhm.
mutuality, that recognition. Agonic is this mode of operation, which is about dominance and submission.
Great. Okay, so that is quite interesting. I mean, we could go on this first question
Mm,
for a while. Once again, another thing that I've probably recognized in obviously now that we know where, what is actually driving the base aspect of these movements, you're looking at how obviously governments, because I think for the probably past 30 years in this kickoff of this neoliberal system, you have had governments, the state, the power of the state has been weakened, it's contracted through privatization of state assets and so many other things that the individuals have become more powerful probably than the state. Then you're probably also seeing that I think there's a greater degree of conflict of interest, i.e., in terms of having, maybe you have political leaders that have huge business interest. You with me, billionaires leading a nation and things like that. All these kind of things are sort of conflict of interest, and probably very undemocratic. However, some of the irony of the situation has been that, we've obviously the Western side of the globe that controls, the political narrative, which has been sort of the pushing of democracy on a global scale. This thing has actually gone on, and now that it's actually taking effect, where you've seen a lot of African countries or maybe South American countries and the Far East sort of catching on to this democratic idea, you are now seeing that, now I don't know if the democracy is really working on this side.
mm,
The irony is that the
mm,
side that is saying do it, do it, do it, and then now that you're ready to do it, then you're seeing that there is something different.
mm,
So they don't seem to be practicing it properly in the
mm,
way, if you want somebody to do something, you have to be
mm,
good. They have to be able to look at you and
mm,
see that you are like at the very best,
mm,
so that if they have any flaws, they can actually look onto you, to give
mm,
directions. And so I can see a lot
mm,
of that. There is a lot of conflict of interest in,
mm.
obviously, in the political spectrum in the
Yeah.
Western, side. So that now when the other sides are not doing things right, you don't have any reference point. Or even
Mm,
if you go to them, they will say, oh, look at what these guys are doing. We can, we're going to do worse. And
mm,
so I am seeing some aspect of that.
mm.
I don't know if I'm very clear because I
Well,
can doing a
you
lot of
are
things in there.
you are clear. I mean, uh, I I think that, for example, cotton is a product that is very leaching of the soil,
Hmm.
and so if you go and exploit a field of cotton and grow it and grow it and grow it until the earth is shattered, and then you hand over the earth to somebody else and say, go and make a democracy on there, go and grow your cotton. That's not
Hmm.
a that's not a fair basis on which to grow cotton.
Yes.
So what you're talking, I think, if you're talking about Africa or China or the East or the globe, whatever you want to call it, the global South, is there's not a level playing field. It didn't start from the same place. And it goes
Yes.
back to what I'm saying is, if you gift people in a really patronizing way, their own freedom or whatever, but it's not on an equal playing field and they're in a threat state because they don't have the same resource acquisition capacities,
Hmm.
or they've got not enough to live on or whatever. Well, that's not going to work very well, is it, for those nations? And also, we've got to remember that the nation state as an idea is quite new in human history as well. So there's all that to mess about with. It's not like a finished product, democracy in a nation state.
Yes.
And I think that there is a writer called Elie Sagan, and he wrote some really interesting things in a book about democracy and paranoia in the 1980s.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that democracy is very, very fragile
Mm-hmm.
and it's very prone to paranoid thinking,
Yes.
us and them thinking. And in order to quell your paranoia, your anxiety, you have to have an other to project all your sense of badness on,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's a racialized other
Yes.
or any other kind of other. You have to have this other to quell your paranoia. Say, oh well, we can deal with the bad because we know where it is.
Yes.
We can define it. We can identify where it is. And I think democracies are going to suffer wherever they are from that paranoia, you know. So, and I think that paranoia is much more prevalent, like I say again, back to survival
Mm-hmm.
issues. If the
Mm-hmm.
organism feels itself under threat, it starts to behave in ways that are fighty and paranoid. And you
Yes.
can see that happening in the Middle East.
Absolutely. Great. So we're going to go to our next question. This question is basically to say, do you have any policies in your organization to redress, inequality concerns? I know that you probably, I mean, obviously you're doing this service, psychotherapy service for the NHS, and we're probably aware that within government policy, they're probably pioneering all these sort of sustainable development ideas in various organizations to probably sometimes help with things to do with the environment, or to sort of redress inequalities. Within your organization, do you think that do you identify any policies in there that is trying to help with these aspects?
I think there are two things. They're very nascent. So one of them is this commitment to green policies.
Mhm.
So on a simple level, to have separate bins within the office for recycling,
Mhm.
to have set up subsidized electricity for car um, charging, for electric car charging, that kind of thing. So that's one. But like I say, it's in its infancy and needs a
Yes.
lot of development. And they're looking to staff within the organization to point out where the issues are that could be developed,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
suggests that if they're looking to staff, that they're kind of already running out of ideas about how to develop this on beyond the micro. The other thing, which I think is much more important, which I think is also in its infancy and somewhat tokenistic, is this commitment to compassionate leadership, to, the trust's logo has the word kindness, sharing, caring within the logo. Yeah. So there's an idea to spread the love instead of, this hierarchical system that I've been talking about. Now, the difficulty for the NHS Trust is that it's really embedded in again, a capitalist system. When you talked about small government earlier, the NHS is really suffering from the small government approach, when they're farming out the responsibility for how capital is invested or used in the trust. So they've left it down to the trust to learn how to be a business rather than
Mm,
a caring institution.
mm, mhm,
And that's problematic.
mhm.
The other way that they insidiously promote this kind of small government but highly capitalist orientated system is systems of regulation. So the trust is regulated by something called the CQC, the Care Quality Commission. And the Care Quality Commission acts very much in health as Ofsted does in education.
Okay.
They're a regulatory body. But in the case of the Care Quality Commission, they are looking for value for money. Yeah. They say they're looking for how many patients are able to be seen within a system, how many are on the waiting list. That's what they say. But essentially, they're looking at the performance of an organization. And as soon as you have a regulation over performance that
Then you
is to
have,
do with money, then you're back to your hierarchical system again.
yes.
Yeah. So the trust is very limited because it's being told by the Care Quality Commission you must see so many patients. And yet the government is defunding the NHS. You've got a massive problem of resources not being put into the NHS or into education or into social care. In
Yes.
fact, they're more depleted than they've ever been. The NHS is closer to breakdown than it's ever been in its history. And that's for a reason. It's because it's being defunded systematically, and private care is being brought in to substitute for it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And so you have this creep towards a totalizing capitalist system. And what happens when you have self-interest and greed in the picture is it reduces care.
Yes.
Yeah. Because if we're back to that agonic system of hierarchies, dominance, submission, the top takes, the bottom suffers, then you compromise the care that caring people can provide. And you don't address the problem, which is the lack of resources being put into the system. And remember what I said about lack of resources produces threat states. And
Correct.
so you basically put the whole NHS in a threat state,
Yes.
yeah, which is really corrosive to what they're trying to do.
Absolutely. That is a great, honestly, I didn't actually expect that much on that question, but that is a really great answer for to that question. I mean, you're looking at things like the NHS underfunding, but then you're seeing, your national insurance taxes being paid because ideally this national insurance needs to go straight to NHS. That is the way when it's set up back in the day, in the post-war era. The idea was that national insurance goes into NHS.
Mm-hmm.
And so what you're actually seeing within the economy is that you're seeing obviously people being taxed for a particular purpose. And then when you go to see the delivery on that purpose, there's no delivery. And so then the idea is that, okay, I suppose, if you look at it in a nutshell, it's basically trying to push more private care.
Mm,
So when you underfund it, then it collapses or it does not function properly. And then you use that as the case to say,
mm,
okay, let's go privatize. But at the same time, you're charging the guy NI. The guy
mm,
is paying NI and he's
mm,
expecting that if I pay NI, then I should be getting that health service,
mm,
that health care. So that's not coming. So
mm.
obviously the ordinary guy is being shortchanged every now and then or for most of
Co-
the time. Now,
correct.
when you once again talk about, these sort of green bin, blue bin, and then electric cars. So, for example, the concept on electric cars, as in the savior to the environment, really doesn't really work.
Mm,
It doesn't work on the basis of number one, I cannot even afford an electric car for a starter.
mm-hmm,
Number two, there is no infrastructure.
mm,
Number three, the people that produces these cars, these electric cars, there are issues with the batteries, the disposal of the batteries. So we do things without really having a foolproof, of because to start, in my opinion, to start something, you need to the manufacturer or whoever the producer needs to
mm,
demonstrate a start to end
mm,
process. Obviously, if these markets are being regulated properly, you need
mm,
to have that start to finish. So let's say if I'm a mining contractor and I'm going to mine a particular area, to take out stuff from the ground, I need to show the state that is going to give me the license to do it, to say, when I finish extraction, this is how I'm going to put the land back well for it to work for the community. And maybe a certain percentage of the extraction that I've taken, I'm going to be using it for, sort of community development, so that the community that are actually losing those resources are going to be getting something, obviously, for the community, for the people within that community. And so, you don't have that start to end process. So this is why you have an electric car, it's got a battery. Even if you ask the electric car manufacturer that, okay, if the battery goes, what are you going to do? They said, we don't know, because the battery, we've not come to that point. So we don't know. How do you dispose of the battery? And so these are things, it's like you're bringing in answers, but it doesn't really work. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And so let's say if you're doing this green bin, blue bin thing, you're trying to say, I'm looking after the environment. But then when you go to look at the way extraction is going on in certain areas of the world, really, that is where the problem is. Then we're looking at things like waste. We have a lot of waste within the system. Are you with me? So you once again, you go to this iPhone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then the lifespan of the product. So, for example, my phone is what do you call it? It's a Samsung A20. Even if I go to Ghana, they will be laughing at me. They will be like, "Wow, what's that?" You get me? So you got this sort of mentality, this iPhone 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you've got the cars. Cars coming out like every 6 months. Whereas a car could last you for 20 years. My dad has got a Mercedes it was there from 1984. It's still on the road today. And so these are the sort of things that you're sort of seeing, these sort of token solutions to these problems that are really a real threat to, to the whole system. You've got the IPCC, obviously report about the way that the sea level may rise at about 1 meter, come something like 2100. And so this is a serious situation that needs, clear attention from governments. And so, yeah, that's how I'm seeing it. And this is why we need to really regroup and, to say, what are we leaving the future, people in the future? So
I want to just like very briefly sort of reorient that view from a different direction.
Great.
Because capitalism has been a huge advantage for us in the last 200 years. So since 1820, literacy levels have gone from very, very, very low to, I don't know, 70, 80% globally. Poverty has gone from majority, 97% or something like that in 1820, as in subsistence level poverty, right down. Even though there's still huge poverty, it's, per capita income is much, much, much higher than in 1820 globally.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so capitalism has a kind of like sting in the tail, because what does it breed off? What does it feed off? It feeds off a problem. So capitalism loves a problem, because if you can put your head to a problem through technologies, through science or whatever, and make some money out of it, then you're on a good thing.
Correct.
So, for example, pharmaceuticals. It's not because that capitalists are interested in people that big pharmaceuticals are built. It's because they need the labor force, they need the proletariat to do the work. They need them healthy. You need healthy people in order to work, in order to produce money.
Yes.
And so it was in their interests, in their consumption interests, to develop pharmaceuticals. So the challenge I would say to you is that a capitalist, he doesn't give a damn about whether we're using up resources or whatever.
Yes.
If you say there's going to be 1 meter rise in sea levels,
Level. Yes.
he just say, okay, so where can I build my next towers, or where can I make my money to sequester carbon dioxide from the atmosphere? Oh,
Yes.
can I build a new machine
Yes.
that sucks that air out, or can I build a machine that exploits the water so that we can make loads of electricity we can sell to people?
Yes.
Yeah. So capitalism doesn't give a damn about problems. It likes problems
Yes.
because it puts to work people with technologies to find solutions to make money.
Great. Fantastic. That is quite interesting. Yeah, but yeah, you're on it. That's a great way to look at it. So yeah, we'll go on to our next question. I think that you've probably answered a bit of that already, but it's to say how effective is the Sustainable Development Goals? I don't know if you're very much aware of it, the Sustainable Development Goals in addressing inequalities in your organization, for example. But I think you probably answered a fair amount of it in the second question. So
Mm.
we'll probably move on to the fourth question. So our fourth question is to ask you what you know about a rights-based economy.
Um, well, I'm not an economist. I'm not a
Yes.
political economist. I'm just a lowly healthcare worker, so my
Yes.
knowledge is limited.
Limited. Okay.
Yeah, but I would say I am interested in the work of, I think she's a professor of philosophy or economics. I can't remember. Her name is Nancy Fraser.
Oh, Nancy Fraser. Okay. Great.
Yeah. And she's talked about something called cannibal capitalism.
Okay.
Yeah. Which is based on this idea of an Ouroboros, which is the symbol of a snake that eats its own tail.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is a very old image.
Yes.
And she talks about three things that should be the aim of a global economic organization in the rights-based sense that you're talking about. And she talks about the three aims should be that it should nurture people, that it should safeguard nature, and it should involve democratic self-rule. So immediately that appeals to me, obviously, because it's a compassion focused approach, sort of seeks to move away from that hierarchy system that I was talking about. And she talks about like 4 obstructions to that. So she talks about a large fund of wealth that's expropriated from subjugated peoples, especially racialized peoples. And that's in terms of land, natural resources, the
Yeah.
dependent unwaged or underwaged labor. And what's really interesting about that is she talks about how women are a sort of form of free labor.
Yes.
You know, if you think that
Yeah.
it's a huge job, what women do,
Yeah.
uh, producing the next generation, and yet it's completely unwaged.
Correct.
Yeah. So she criticizes the existing system because it feeds on unwaged labor and supposedly free resources. And yeah, she talks about so that's the second point really about the social reproduction performed by women, which is unwaged. And then she talks about a large fund of free or cheap inputs from nature, which you were talking about when you were talking about, for example, exploitation of the Congo. Why is there a massive battle going on with the M20 around Rwanda and
Hmm.
around Eastern Congo, it's because of the resources there.
Yes.
And there are big players in those movements. Those
Yes.
people are being funded from somewhere. You need
Absolutely.
money for armaments and all the rest of it. So, I think there's that. And then the last thing she says is an obstruction is a large body of public goods uh, supplied by states and public powers. So she talks about the way that, you were talking about governments manipulating the system. She's talking about the way they are exploited by a capitalist system, governmentally. But yes, she is all for, a more
Yes.
nurture, safeguard nature, democratic self-rule approach to things. I think she's a bit naive, but I like her. I like her ideas a lot.
Ideas. Yeah, 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 yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. So that, in effect, what you've just explained is definitely a rights-based economy, because the rights-based economy is an economic model that is centered on the production and consumption that is done in a manner that actually meet the needs of the current existence and also for future, to make sure that we're taking care not only for ourselves now, but for the future generation, by way of organizing the production and consumption in a way that bridges inequalities and also have the planet, obviously looking at the planetary boundaries or the limitations within what the planet can do for us for now and the future generation. And so this Nancy Fraser's work is one of those works that can sort of be incorporated into the rights-based economy, because we're actually looking at synergies. So you have a degrowth advocate. I am actually on the project side. I'm actually part of the degrowth advocate. So where our emphasis is basically cutting down the waste.
Mm,
There's so much waste
mm,
within the system that could be cut down to save the planet, also
mm,
to reduce the consumption in a manner that sort of bridges inequalities, but at the same time, having that scope within the system for the global south to also develop to catch up. But
mm,
obviously, from what you have said and from the information you have given on capitalism, that seems quite a naive or unrealistic way of thinking. But sometimes I like to put a little spin on this idea on the basis of when you look at the Scandinavian economies. So, for example, when you look at Sweden, it's an economic model that they have that is more like a mix. It's a mixed economic model. So it's an economic model that allows capital to thrive, but at the same time, it has an equal hand in producing that sort of baseline. So you have effective government that puts in the baseline for the essential services, for example, things like housing, health, travel, household energy. These are in the hands of the state because these are the basics. And so sometimes people can, when we talk about a right-based economy, people may sort of cool run away with the fact that obviously this is not realistic. Are you
mm.
with me?
Yeah.
In obviously as an alternative model to replace capitalism, but in reality, it could be. It could be on the basis of, you want looking at the progress that we have made
Mm,
under this capitalist system over the years,
mm,
i.e., in terms of if you talk about education, health,
mm,
general human progress, there has been surely a great deal of progress in the way that we do things, even in the efficient manner in which we do things.
mm,
But the fact is that we want to have a system whereby people are not suffering too much,
mm,
or more like the progress that we have made, it should be to the benefit of humanity. Are
mm,
you with me? Because we're seeing a lot of accumulation. So, for example, if I have more than, sometimes if I have more than what I need, I could go on doing a whole lot of stuff,
mm,
just this, I'm going to lower this to a very personal sort of level.
mm,
So, you got a guy that's got a lot of money.
mm,
If I have a lot of money, I can now start thinking of, oh, maybe I could have a girlfriend. I can afford it. Maybe I could take a bit of drugs because I can buy it. Are you with
mm,
me? I can get into all sorts of mischief because
mm,
I have so much. But if I have sort of adequate and it's not excessive, I'm going to be a little bit more thoughtful in the way that I organize my life, if you
mm,
see what I mean. So we are
yeah,
trying to look at a mix,
mm,
an economy that considers, the people that are going to be, as you were saying, the people that are going to be, serving at the labor front, they
mm,
have to be healthy.
yeah,
They exactly.
yeah,
So you need to have a
yeah,
system that is like a mix system where the government comes in and provide that baseline
mm,
rather than say, let's say if we look at the commodification of housing, for example,
mm,
I could be like a policeman or a nurse. I live in London
mm,
and I cannot afford to live in London
mm,
because for example, I could be paid 2,500 and my rent for a two-bedroom flat in London is like 2,200.
mm,
And then
okay,
obviously when I take that money,
mm,
the rest of it is all stress, maybe going to live on food banks,
yeah,
probably not being in a position to be able to afford to even have a family,
mm,
a child.
mm,
And even if I do have a child, the system, the way that I probably have to put in the hours of work, I will not be able to care for that child properly.
mm,
And then obviously the problem of the antisocial behaviors will kick in. And it creates this cycle.
yeah,
It's a negative cycle. And so um, we are communicating with the people in power. Obviously, this project is more like a bottom-up approach, where people are like doing it. If the state is not going to do it, let the community do it. Are you with me? But I'm always thinking of a top bottom approach as well to meet it. So I'm looking at it from both directions. And
yeah,
so we tend to find a lot of resistance from the top. If you were to put this idea to somebody at the top, you find that
mm,
there is a lot of resistance,
mm,
obviously, because the top wants to keep the status quo. Are you
yeah,
with me?
yeah.
Uh,
I think that back to the boy who's destroying or trying to control his foster care or his adopter. It
mhm.
was always a sort of mystery to me. Why is it that some kids do that and some kids accept a more democratic way of living, a more reciprocal, mutuality, supportive way of living? How come some kids persist with their dominant, controlling, power-hungry way of operating within a foster placement as they've learned from their original family? And
Mhm.
the only way that I could square that with the theory of agonic and hedonic behavior is that I said to myself, well, there are some people like the Elon Musks of the world who are naturally agonic. That
Yes.
is to say that they don't feel themselves to be in a threat state, but they're acquisitive. They are hugely acquisitive. They're hugely competitive. They're the type of people who think that vulnerability is a form of weakness,
Yes.
not a form of strength.
Yes.
That uncertainty or ambivalence uh, is a form of weakness, not a form of wisdom. And so I think the problem is that politics is often dominated by agonic minded people.
Correct.
It's a very competitive system.
Yes.
And so it ends up with people who are good at fighting and taking the spoils. So
Yes.
that's one thing. The other thing that I would say is back to what I said about agonic or hedonic systems. So what I would say about Sweden, for example, is that it has a population of about 10.4 million,
Correct.
and we have a population of nearing
65,
60 something million
66,
in this country.
66 million.
But
Correct.
same area, same kind of, well, similar
Space.
sort of space,
Space.
but
Yeah.
packed in.
Wow.
And so the demands on their healthcare system and not that
Right.
like the demands on ours. Yeah.
Correct.
So maybe that puts them in a better place to be more generous spirited in their
Wow.
politics. Yeah.
Wow.
The other thing is, even when they're generous spirited in their politics, you can see that their agonic behavior still comes out in the racialized way that they operate with their population.
Yes.
So that so refugees aren't getting an easy time, and now they're putting a stop on immigration
Correct.
into the country. So I think that wherever you go, you are going to have that
Yes.
threat state being triggered, even in places very seemingly enlightened, like Finland, like
Yes.
like the Scandi countries. Yeah.
Yes. 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 Yes.
So what we need to do is we
Wow.
need to distribute the kind of wealth in a way that makes everybody feel safe. And when
Wow.
everybody feels safe, and that's a huge thing, like you say, how do you even begin to do that? But
You
when
can.
everybody feels safe, then you're going to get less of these despotic Elon Musk types, and you're going to get people in charge who actually care, know how to care. The
Yes.
other one last thing I wanted to say was something very interesting came to my mind when you were talking about the relationship between national insurance and health service provision.
Yes.
Yeah, because it made me think that, because then I thought about the system in France, where when they give you like a slip of paper
Yes.
uh, about your national insurance, they show you exactly what the percentage is of where that money has gone within the system. So you
Yes.
can look for yourself. And then I thought, well, that doesn't seem to make that much of a difference to people. And it made me wonder, well, what would make a difference? And I thought, actually, it's a disconnect between the person and the system that they are giving to that is a
Mm.
problem. So, when it was something to do with our health workers and COVID, everyone's on their doorstep banging their pots and pans.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But what I think we need in order to trigger empathy
Mm-hmm.
collectively is to have a better, more direct relationship between your giving and your system.
Mm-hmm.
So somehow you would give in a way that you see the outcome of it in your system locally, like
Yeah.
you're talking about, like I'm giving to you in my time.
Yes.
It's a direct contact and it's
Correct.
built on the relationship between me and you.
Yes.
Because in the abstract, if someone randomly sent an invitation to me, I'd probably turn it down
Mm.
because
Yes.
what do I care? So
Yes.
to generate care, I think you need a direct relation between the giving of your capital and the system that you rely upon.
Wow. Wow. These are both answers are quite powerful, and the analysis that you've made on that sort of Sweden UK comparison, obviously linking it with your agnostic and this sort of theory, it really is powerful. It's powerful because you can see it playing back, and also obviously the field of politics, as you mentioned, and the competitiveness of the actors definitely is a big way of shaping the way things are going. So that is quite interesting.
Mm.
We will probably move on to our next question. Hmm. Well, okay. I'm going to ask this question because it's on number 5. Question 5 says, what would you prefer and why? An economic model based on satisfying human needs and human rights, or one that is based on the accumulation of profits and the perpetual GDP growth? So that is number
Mm.
5 is an interesting one.
I mean, you probably know my answer already, you know.
But do say something. We're still
Well, you've got Samsung whatever 20. I've got not Huawei.
Huawei. Is it
No,
Huawei?
Xiaomi, a Chinese Xiaomi phone,
Oh, okay. I
which is
never heard of that one
yeah.
before, but
So, but that's interesting as well because um, the way they operate is to undercut the market here by selling their phones much cheaper
Right.
when they're kind of similar level of
Service.
quality.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they
Position.
can do that because Chinese labor is cheaper.
Cheap.
So
Yeah.
actually it's not great that I'm buying a Xiaomi phone because obviously I'm exploiting the system
The cheap labor. Yeah. Of course.
yeah. I don't know. I mean, to be realistic, it's not about an either or. Like I said,
Yes.
we wouldn't have had the amazing technological developments and then developments in health,
Yes.
and
Where we
developments.
are.
We wouldn't be where we are without capitalism.
Yeah. Advancement. Yes.
But what I would say probably is it's not up to me to answer that question.
Correct.
Marx, in the 18 something, he said that when you've got a full exploitation globally of the proletariat,
Yeah.
um, and I don't know how this works, but capitalism will collapse itself.
Okay.
Yeah. And it may be that we're having this conversation because it's already almost like you can see
It's coming
the
to question.
big wave coming, it's coming in one way or another. So I think it's unsustainable. We know
Mm-hmm.
it's unsustainable.
Mm-hmm.
I think what's really interesting, although it's been challenged recently, is that we have moved in the direction of global human rights. If you think, you could say, okay, so that came out of the Second World War, and the
Yes.
creation of the United Nations.
Yes.
And then you could say, oh, well, the United Nations is also, increasingly thinking like the World Bank, it's all about exploiting
Yes.
capital.
Yeah.
But you can't get away from it, whether you talk about the United Nations or universal uh, suffrage for women that came before World War II. You're
Yes.
talking about a system, a species that's trying to learn to be nicer, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
to each other. If you
Yes.
think about what's happening in my kids' school, the way they talk about race and ethnicity, about a feminism, even in its way, about caring and sharing. You
Mm-hmm.
look at my trust, you didn't have that 30 or 40 years ago. It wasn't part of the conversation in my childhood at all.
Yeah.
So in a way, it's really hard to separate out, this crazy runaway train of capitalism from all of the things that it's also brought to us that are, that are the death of it, that will be the death of it. Because, if we're going to be better off and therefore nicer to each other, then we're going to ask ourselves, do we really want this system that is basically exploitative?
Yes.
That would be my answer.
Wow. That's amazing. That's pretty good in the way that you've answered that question. It is a difficult one because it's very easy for anybody to say, oh, it's all based on a right-based economy,
Mm,
but the reality is that is not the case.
mm,
But we know that at the point where we are and the challenges that we're having, the reality of the things going on in the environment and also with the widening of the gap of inequalities I think the associated social problems of inequality
mm,
is a real concern.
mm,
Especially housing is a really big one. I mean, it was kind of quite interesting to see that at the time of COVID, even people that were homeless, you couldn't find them on the street.
mm,
There was nobody on the street
mm,
because they put them in hotels or something.
mm, mm,
Somehow it kind of made me feel that so in reality you can actually solve the problem.
mm. Yeah.
That was the impression that I
Mm,
got.
mm,
And so yes, definitely it's not easy to say this or that, but the reality is that we see that according to Max Weber, that has come to the point where capitalism has come under a lot of question
mm,
at this stage.
mm,
And I think that it does have that opportunity to retain itself if it's really willing to shift Are you with me? If it's really willing to shift to create that sort of baseline, I think that the weakening of the state over the years
mm,
has been one of the main problems
mm,
because there was a data from the World Economic Forum that indicated that 10% of the top 10 in the world, that is the wealth, they own 76% of the global wealth.
mm,
So 10%.
mm,
And so that is such a huge, huge, huge gap.
mm,
And that creates the problem.
mm,
And so capitalism, it could survive, but it has to really come in with a sort of a shift that is very effective, a
mm,
shift that people can actually see and experience.
mm,
But I don't know if it can do that.
mm.
So we shall see. So we'll come up to question number 6, which is, in your opinion, what's your opinion about sort of shortened working hours, less hours per day? That is when we talk about short working hours in a week, and then less working hours per day. Things like work-life balance, universal basic income, and universal basic services. I don't know what you know about these things or what your take is on them. I mean, I could give you a little bit on the universal basic income and universal basic services if you would like me to say that I can.
They're doing an experiment, aren't they, in Finland with, I think it's Finland, is it, that they're doing a universal basic income experiment?
Correct. Apparently, also in the UK, to my surprise,
All right,
they
yes.
have about 30 people that
Yeah,
they are giving
that's right.
1,600 a month.
That's right. Yeah, I remember that.
And they're
Yeah,
basically going to be studying these people for a period of time
yeah,
to see how that can improve their lives. Obviously,
yeah,
1,600 is not, doesn't really take you far,
yeah.
but it's sort of, if you really want to do that blah blah blah, which we hear from the World Economic Forum. We know there's an inequality gap, we know there's an environmental problem, but we're really going to work to eliminate poverty, and we're doing everything to
Mm,
they say these, and obviously the sustainable development goals, which was set
mm,
in 2015
mm,
going up to 2030, we're going to bridge inequalities, we're going to eliminate poverty. But then
mm,
when you check from 2015 till now,
mm,
inequalities, even post-COVID, just from COVID to post-COVID, the gap
mm,
is huge. And
yeah.
so you've got these things in place that have this
Mm,
sort of nice rhetorical message. But
mm,
the reality is that when you look at the statistics, it's actually going the opposite direction.
mm.
And
Okay.
so, yes, this universal basic income
Mm,
thing and the services and work-life balance and stuff like that, if you could share a bit of light on it, obviously
mm,
from your own perspective, this is a very sort of a very casual
mm,
approach of getting to hear what you have to say on this.
mm. Well, I think that yes. Okay. So in the last, so for example, the junior doctors are on strike, aren't they? Because they want something crazy like 32%
Oh
pay
wow.
increase
Well,
to counter
the
being,
rising cost of living.
well, the fact that they've had no real inflation related increase in the last decade or
Okay.
longer or something like that. So
Okay.
they're looking for something that reflects that lack of increase.
Mhm.
And what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that you could say on the one hand that there's been a decrease in living standards, but there's also been an increase in expectations,
Mhm. Mhm.
So
Mhm. 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 That
actually,
is also quite interesting.
yeah, so actually, what is it, £1,500 in that experiment in
Yes.
England,
1,600.
1,600.
Yes.
Now, I would say if rent was a viable price,
Mhm.
then I think 1,600 is a lot of money. because we have a small mortgage and
Mhm.
there's 4 of us and we live off 2,000.
Great.
Yeah, because I'm part-time.
Yes.
Okay. Then if we look at part-time, you know, you could say, so why am I going part-time? It's because I've prioritized being happy over
Being,
being a consumer.
yes.
Yeah. Or you could call it poverty. I mean, whatever. It's not really poverty. I
Mm.
just don't I just don't buy an iPhone, whatever, you know,
Yes.
because I could, to me, it doesn't matter. That what matters is that I
They
have a
can
better
call
quality of
somebody.
life. And there's
Yes.
lots of people, especially since COVID, they don't want to be slaves to the system anymore.
Hmm.
You know, they don't want to be that exploited proletariat anymore. And that's a
Yes.
kind of revolution. Okay,
Yes.
they've tasted what it's like. Kids have tasted what it's like not to go to school,
Yes.
and
To see
adults
their
have,
parents more.
right, and adults have tasted what it's like not to have to schlep to work every day and slave their guts out for something that they don't enjoy doing. And of
Yes.
course, the capitalist system has produced dreams, you know, or you can have a life like Love Island or something, you know,
Yes.
where you could, where you could just sun yourself on the, and so a lot of people are checking out of this system.
Hmm.
Maybe they won't be next to the pool, but they don't want to be in the office either, and
Yeah.
so that's changing the economy because it's meaning that employers have to offer different options. They have to
Yes.
offer flexible pay. They have to
Yes.
offer home working because to keep the proletariat coming and producing the goods for these super rich that you were talking about, they've
Yes.
got to kind of incentivize it a little bit.
Yes.
So that's a kind of quiet revolution in my mind. On the other hand, just to put a dampener on
Hmm.
things, the other side of it is when you start talking about part-time, it immediately reminds me of what Marx said about the modern capitalist system is about breaking down the means of production into the smallest components.
Hmm.
Bum, 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 bum. Thousands of little parts.
Yes.
Each person has a tiny part of that to do.
Hmm.
And what you're looking at today is a worker who may have like 12 different jobs or even
Hmm.
12 different careers in their lifetime as they keep
Yes.
moving from one to another.
Yes.
You've got a bit economy, you've got 0 hours contracts.
Yes.
So another way of calling part-time is saying people who basically have to just keep shifting from one job to another, they might do 2 or 3 different jobs a day,
Right.
yeah, to to make ends meet. There's no
Yes.
such thing as a lifelong career anymore. There's no stability there. Yeah. Why is it happening? It's for the full exploitability of the people. Yeah.
Yes.
The system,
Okay.
that's what the world, when the world, when the World Bank says, oh, we want everybody out of poverty,
Hmm.
that's their slogan, that's their motto.
Yes.
Free, a world free of poverty. It's
Mm.
rubbish. What they want is a fully exploitable global workforce. Yeah, that's the other side of it. So when we talk about part-time, we can talk about sitting in your garden instead of going out, but somewhere in that mix is you still have to make money. And I'm very
Mhm.
lucky because I'm at the top of my pile, so I
Yes.
can work part-time and still get enough to live.
Yes.
For those who can't, they're doing this, that, the other. They're doing 3, 4, 5, 6 different things in order to get by, and the system is absolutely exploiting them.
Wonderful. Wow. That's absolutely great. On the universal basic services side, uh, some of the arguments were that if the state was to do their bit to ensure that, the basic needs for it, the basic needs when I talk about is the housing, the health, the transport, even the food, because I mean, what I have actually observed in the COVID period, and even, I will say, even things like airport parking charges, Fuel cost. These are areas that needs a huge amount of regulation. The regulation needs to come back because the reason is that these operators, market operators, are cartels. They are monopolists, and so you couldn't let them run free because, for example, there are only a few companies that are supplying household gas and electricity. The regulator needs to be on top of them because if you don't regulate them, they can charge any price because you, the consumer, don't have a choice, really.
Mm,
Whatever they, if you don't pay, they will shut you down
mm,
and you cannot live in a cold house with your children.
mhm,
Are you with me?
mhm,
You go the same when you drive your car to an airport. You know, the parking space, the land is paid for like probably long time ago, but they keep increasing the price. You leave your car there for a place like Stansted, 15 minutes in the, like in the front part, you're going to be paying £25 if you go past. I mean, you can easily get there, and let's say you want to run to the toilet and come back, it's 15 minutes. You will pay £25. The list just goes on. Obviously, housing, cost of housing in London,
mm,
the supermarkets. I work in a place, and every single item has gone up in price
mhm,
with
mhm,
all sorts of excuses. But then when you go back to look at the profits, you
mm,
see the line is like that.
mm,
The profit,
mhm,
and then I look at the fuel. In the time of the COVID, fuel prices just double literally.
mhm,
And once again, if you're a guy on the road, you need that fuel to move around.
mm,
Once again, you hear all these excuses, but then when you go and look at the Shell profits in 3 years, that's the graph. That's how you see it.
mm,
It's like a straight line up.
mhm,
And so you need these regulators to come in, or
mm,
the state has to somehow get involved.
mm,
And so what we're trying to say is that when you have these universal basic services in
mhm,
place,
mm,
what it does is that your 1600 can go a very long way.
mhm, mhm, mm,
If I get on a train, say from, and I'll say that obviously some part of Essex into London,
mm,
it's probably just about an hour, 15 minutes
mhm,
journey.
mhm,
Off peak cost me £38 one way.
mm,
Are you with me? I do the
mm,
same journey probably in Spain. It will probably cost me €5.
mm, mm,
And so these are the things that we are, as part of the rights-based economy,
mm,
you are really calling the state to come back and,
mm,
and look at these systems
mm,
so that there's a sort of a balance in a way.
mm,
It's
mm,
not like you're sort of trying to say, we want everybody to be equal, but you want to create an environment
mm,
that allows that guy 1600 to stretch
yeah.
so that he has a decent life. So that is
Mhm,
the thing on the universal basic
mhm, mhm,
services.
mhm,
At this stage, I'll probably just now go to the last question,
mhm,
which is question number 7. So the question number 7, I actually spoke to this chap on tax justice network. His name is Marty Cahonan. He was
mhm,
one of my interviewees
mm,
on this project. So he's the guy behind. So his work is to do with sort of tracking illicit funds globally,
mm,
and also looking at offshore shell companies
mm,
where multinationals are
mm,
hiding huge
mm,
sums of money. And so on one of the pages, this is what I read. It says the Tax Justice Network startling report on November 23 suggests governments are estimated to lose $4.3 trillion in the next decade
mm,
through tax avoidance by ultra rich and the wealthy.
mhm,
So my question here is that what do you think about offshore shell companies avoiding and evading taxes? Could this taxation revenue be used to support universal basic services?
mm,
So this is why I try to sort of go on a little bit about the universal basic services
mm,
because it comes into this questions. this last question. So we would like to hear maybe if you have any comments on this last question.
Well, wouldn't it be lovely? It's like when the government was given a chance to tax the oil companies for the profits that they're making during
Yes.
the pandemic.
Yes.
Yeah, was it the pandemic? Oh no,
Yeah,
no,
just
just
after. Kind of.
the global energy prices going up,
Yeah.
isn't it? It's a post-pandemic,
Mm-hmm.
and they chose not to. And that's a kind of form of legal daylight robbery, isn't it?
Yes.
So I would say offshore tax havens and all of that is just a kind of symptom of a larger malaise. So yeah, you could attack the illegal side, but you have to address the legal ways in which people are being robbed
Yes.
uh, first. So there's a problem with the system of uh, very narrowly defined interests, and I think it's more along the lines of tackling the things that you were talking about with universal credit. So yeah, there's billions being siphoned off, isn't there, in unpaid tax.
Yes.
Until you deal with the politicians who allow that to happen,
Mm-hmm.
see, it's like the drugs trade. The
Mm-hmm.
drugs trade, they say the idea is that we must prohibit something in order to stop it affecting uh, our health and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, that doesn't work. Prohibition didn't work in the 1920s in America. Prohibition of drugs around the globe doesn't work now. It just doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so why do they persist with it? They persist with it because uh, the electorate demand that you shouldn't have drugs, but they also persist with it because it's a lucrative business.
Isn't it?
Prohibition.
Mm-hmm.
It's a hugely lucrative business because if you are able to legalize drug taking, that you go down the pharmacy and you get your prescription
Mm-hmm.
for whatever you want, then you knock out this massive, massive market,
Yes.
which is feeding people like from the global south to the global north.
And could one even say creating jobs?
It's creating jobs, it's creating massive wealth. It's a capitalist system gone wild, you know. So there's no interest in there's no interest, Professor Nutt, was it, who said we should be legalizing drugs? There's been loads and loads of studies say you need a globalized legalization
Mm-hmm.
of the drug
Mm-hmm.
system, but no. And of course, we have an epidemic of uh, legal drug taking in America. So someone somewhere is benefiting from all of this. And
Yes.
that's what I feel needs to be really, really tackled.
Yes.
That system that uh, rewards greed, because that's where the corruption takes place in legal systems like politics.
Yes. Wonderful. Wonderful. So, Adam, I can only thank you so much. By us doing this interview, I myself have gained so much knowledge from the manner and obviously the knowledge that you've imparted in answering these questions. You've definitely given us a great deal of, a different kind of perspective of the way that we should be sort of visualizing these things and also looking at it from a more realistic approach, what could and what couldn't happen. And so that is extremely useful. So I'll probably, before I stop the recording, maybe I'll ask you that final question. If you do have any sort of final remarks, anything that you want to say, you could say. I know you said a lot, but in case you have any final remarks, then you could say, and then we will then come to a stop with the recording.
No, I just thank you for the conversation. I've really appreciated it, Charles. It's been really good to talk to you.
Wonderful. Okay, so I'm going to officially stop this recording. So if you bear with me a minute, let's go for this.